Hey, bless you all, family. Big blessings to you as that sun sets. Yeah, we're gonna spit some knowledge. I just got some books from the Denver Public Library. Notice how that's a rainbow too. Anyway, and that darkness is fertility. Yeah. Anyway, from which, anyway, Colorado color red. Anyway, so I just sitting here, one of my favorite steps. Now, yeah, I made a peace offering the other day, wrote it in blood. Yeah, as the earth. Anyway, just showing some love. But I want to read you a little something from this book, so don't mind me. So this book is called Making Space for Indigenous Feminism, second edition by Joyce Green. And let me just read the back. It might be interesting to you. Hold on. Okay, never mind. I can't turn it around. But if it's backwards to you, I apologize. So I'll let you look at the sunset. So the first edition of Making Space for Indigenous Feminism proposed that Indigenous feminism was a valid and indeed essential theoretical and activist position that introduced a roster of important Indigenous feminist contributors. And this new edition builds on the success and research that first and provides updated and new chapters that cover a wide range of some of the most important issues facing Indigenous peoples today: violence against Indigenous women, recovery of Indigenous self-determination, racism, misogyny, and decolonization. Specifically, new chapters deal with Indigenous resurgence, feminism amongst the Sami. I love the Sami people, something about them. Anyway, and the way that they build you gotta look into the way they build. And why aren't we building like that? Indigenous Sami people from Scandinavia. Indigenous Sami people from Scandinavia. Big love from the Mile High. Big love to the Sami people. May you be protected. And your reindeer in the lands in which all of that wonderful, beautiful culture comes from. May the Sami. I feel you out here in the middle, in the heart of Turtle Island. Yeah. Big love to you. 5,280 feet of love sent to you. Yeah. Anyway, so specifically, new chapters deal with Indigenous resurgence, feminism among the Sami and Aboriginal of Australia, the neoliberal restructuring of Oaxaca, and Canada's settler racism and sexism, and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada. So written by Indigenous feminists and allies, this book provides a powerful and original intellectual and political contribution demonstrating that feminism has much to offer Indigenous women and all Indigenous people in their struggles against oppression. And the thing about feminism, it has nothing to do with sex, it has nothing to do with male or female, but what it has to do with is energy, yeah? It's being fluid like spirit and water, or it's gonna be rigid like this concrete, which will soon be cracking and crumbling. And anything that is rigid is subject to break. So that's something we have to think about. So that's why there's so much corruption, because these laws and everything like that, there's no room for evolution. So there's only room for corruption, right? So if things are made rigid, they're bound to break. It's by design. They're rigid. They're not going. Look at that crack. How hard was it? It was smooth, right? So you thought, until this earth, because she is feminine, decided to crack everything that is rigid. You understand that? So femininity has nothing to do with male or female. It has everything to do with being fluid, right? So it's about time that we get re-educated and unlearn these things of separation. Because these things that are rigid, they continue to fall and crumble every 400 years. So these same rigidity in mind, rigidity in systems continue to have a place at a seat because they're not fluid in the evolution. And so unless we can evolve and understand that, which requires earth medicine, indigenous knowledge, and a new way of being, we're gonna end up cracking and crumbling every few hundred years. And I think our little children, and this little child deserves a better future than that cracking and crumbling systems and structures. And so this is where the femininity coming from a male. The only thing that healed me after Uncle Sam and the man and everything else masculine beat me up and hurt my body is this feminine earth, divine mother, green man. Green man is, you know what I mean? Geb, all these earth and nature and cosmic vibrations. all these things that are unattainable, but you can align with. You understand? They are attainable, but they're uncontrollable. I guess you could say. You don't. Yeah, you belong to it. It doesn't belong to you. Those are the things that people try to contain or manipulate, distort, and that ends up cracking and hurting themselves in the long run. So that's my take on feminism. It's not a political thing. You know what I mean? So don't let it be like that. It's everything that it's everything that you've been taught is wrong and missing, right? Anyway, it's something that you're missing. So I'm going to read you a little something from here because it's really, I'll read you two things. It's just some knowledge here on the front steps of the Capitol, the heart, yeah? When we heal ourselves, that's what I heard the other day. When we heal ourselves, she heals herself as well. Because we're not separate beings living on this planet. We are her cells. So we have microorganisms living on our body. We are her microorganisms. We're not a bug or a ladybug. We're not a slave to this planet to go and pick up other people's trash. So don't be manipulated by these people and their systems of abuse, the rigidity and the corruption. And be awoken by your truth, that you're here to create a place of peace and beauty and health and vibrate and align with the highest frequency of love, which is cleanliness, fertility, you know. Anyway, it's beautiful. So I'm gonna read you a couple of these things. There we are. No music, but we have a lot of noise destroying this. And that's one thing I said too. Work is not destroying this earth. And how hard is it to find a job where you don't destroy this earth for money? So you're selling your soul for a piece of blood money. And everywhere that money was accepted has been blood on this earth. Everywhere. So some indigenous peoples, I know that they don't accept dollars. A lot of people don't accept dollars because anywhere that those dollars have been bloodshed, yeah? So that's important to know. But how much noise is there? How much music is here? There is none. There's only noise, right? By things that destroyed this earth. And you call that building or creating, is not. Everything here, you destroyed this earth to create nothing. To create a structure that has no life. Not one plant on that building. Not one plant on that building. Not one plant on that building. Not vertical agriculture, nothing. So to me, it's like, why aren't we using indigenous knowledge on top of this? You know what I mean? It's a skeleton, yeah? But it needs some life, it needs some flesh. So all you've done is take the life of this earth to create a skeleton, in which we have the responsibility now to bring back to life and put flesh on this. All that air conditioning, all those closed windows, what if they were open? We have 300 plus days of sunshine here in Colorado. Long live love and sunshine. What if those were actually opened and you weren't separate from this environment and then you weren't over here breathing in oxygen tanks instead of breathing fresh air? What if it cooled itself? Because there's brick mud buildings that have been standing for 3,500 years built by indigenous peoples. And they don't have any air conditioning, but those windows are open and they still stand, and they're so tightly built that the winds can't knock them down. I forgot where this was, Syria or something like that. Anyway, it's beautiful. So anyway, indigeneity has a lot to do with modernity, and we gotta learn a lot from each other, yeah? So don't let it be like feminism is woman. It's not. There's a lot of shit a lot of things to be unlearned and a lot of things to learn. So I'm gonna let that go. And we're gonna get to indigenous feminist resurgence against contemporary patriarchy. And so I'm just gonna read this first paragraph, and I hope that it enlightens you and intrigues your interest, and now just like the other books, to at least read it on this journey. Because they're not gonna teach you this in school, right? Because they're patriarchal schools and a patriarchal system. And they're definitely not indigenous friendly right now. So they haven't been for a long time. Hence the treaties, yeah? Let's see the record of that. Anyway, so as an ideological and activist framework that seeks to shed light on indigenous women's experiences of hetero-patriarchal and colonial oppression, indigenous feminism has often been positioned as a peripheral or inconsistent with the broader indigenous political movements. Broader in this context refers to the movements that purport to have a collective orientation to the unencumbered or to be unencumbered by the feminist analysis. In the era of constitutional rights and recognition, many potentially transformative opportunities were foreclosed by the unwillingness of indigenous representative organizations to critically examine how patriarchy and misogyny have shaped indigenous women's lives. Not just indigenous women, I want to add though. She didn't say this, but I'm going to say indigenous men too, because they are impacted by the way the women are, right? And the way the women raise the men, right? We all come from the womb, man, right? And they do woman's work is never done, right? Everything revolves around a woman. So they affect the man. And if you're a man, we'll start learning to honor these women, right? Because you came from them. I'm just saying. Anyway, that's my... So it's not just indigenous women's lives. They infect the males' lives. And we need to help that, yeah? That's our job. Women create, we protect. That's your male physical body's purpose, is to create and protect. They have so much power that we are not privileged to, yeah? Because they earn it. Spiritual, energetic, and all these other different levels. And it's nothing to be manipulated. It's something to be treated as sacred, because it is. Anyway, we're affected by each other, yeah? It's not just women's lives affected. And not all of this is limited to colonial factors. As indigenous peoples, from grassroots to activist levels, move towards political strategies grounded in the resurgence of indigenous ways of being, the degree to which we can critically attend to gender and sexuality will determine whether we reproduce or interrupt the dichotomous positioning of indigenous women's and political or collective political issues, as well as the ongoing marginalization of indigenous gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, and two-spirit experiences. In this chapter, I explore how gender can impact the diversity of ways that indigenous peoples can participate in resurgence, demonstrating that the liberatory potential of indigenous resurgence movement will be limited if it does not attend to the relationship between gender and indigeneity. Furthermore, I argue that indigenous feminism has a potential to nuance and advance the way in which we think about indigenous resurgence. As indigenous feminist analysis has a potential to provide an analytical framework that is attentive to the many dimensions of colonial violence and guide the resurgence of ways of being that are free from heteronormative logics of empowerment. I think that's important. And I just want to say, this is important work, important, I guess, an area that is needed, that has not been very much applied in our society, from my experience living on this beautiful earth. Thus far, I have yet to see any, and not just melanated indigeneity. Like I said, Sami people, the indigenous of Sami culture in Scandinavia, and even the Japanese in Japan. I was learning about the indigenous Japanese that were almost exterminated as well by, I guess you call it colonialism, imperialism, and but their DNA, they're surviving, of this earth. And so I just think it's important that we give them a voice, give them a name, and learn. And it's quite interesting how we're all related in that regard. People of this earth, indigenous knowledge and things, is something beautiful about it. And I don't think it should be erased or hidden. I think it's something that could really empower us and unite us and learn from each other. Because right now we're at a brink. All this technology in this world, and the best way that we can use it is to destroy everything and then try to leave. Get out of here. There's people that are of this earth who could probably really help to view this world in another way. If we learn their language, the foods, the plant medicines, and how the relationship of spirit and respect of this earth, it could improve the way that we build, why we build, how we build. You know what I mean? And not just build, but create systems in which is responsible to the things that were told are unseen. And even like the junk DNA, that was a bullcrap thing for a long time. Nothing in us is not used or needed, you know, where we're created. But indigeneity can help us use your more of an imagination and natural way of being and showing up in this artificial world. You know what I mean? Like, that I just think is important to me, it's extremely important. And I walk on both sides of this, you know, my whole my life. So it's just something to bring together. So anyway, this is another first page I want to read to you. Politics of gendered violence in the indigenous communities, page 103. And it says, in Canada, indigenous women in the organizations have been calling so in Canada, indigenous women and in their organizations have been calling for the attention of political leaders to the matter of missing and murdered indigenous women for several years. And not just Canada, the world over, yeah? While the list of those who have gone missing and murdered has grown to over 1,500 names at the time of this book. According to the Native Women's Association, the numbers will be as many as 4,000. Only recently, the issue has been put on mainstream political agenda as the new Liberal government agreed to conduct a national inquiry into the crisis. Many indigenous women are subjected to violence from settler men, as well as men from indigenous communities and families. In short, there is no safe space for these women. In the Sami, name of our traditional territories, which lie primarily in Scandinavia, violence against Sami women is less politically prominent, but also in need of assessment and remediation. This chapter focuses on the politics of gendered violence in indigenous communities. More specifically, it examines on the depolitization of violence against women in indigenous communities and argues that there is a pressing need to examine the ways in which gendered violence is explained, addressed, and often sanctioned in indigenous communities. The chapter draws on Crenshaw's concept of the political intersectionality and examines responses to gendered violence in indigenous communities through two groups: indigenous women in Canada and Sami women in Scandinavia. In 2012, the first ever high-level UN meeting focused solely on indigenous women was held in New York. The fact that the theme of the expert group meeting was named Combating Violence Against Indigenous Women and Girls is telling. As the meeting noted, violence against indigenous women is endemic in many countries. One of the main issues discussed was the challenge of recognizing the internal dimension of violence against indigenous women and girls, the existence and prevalence of which is often forbidden subject within indigenous communities. Hence, one more, hold on. Indigenous leadership and institutions were urged to adopt gendered violence as an inseparable part of their human rights and self-determination advocacy, requiring the recognition and dismantling of existing patriarchal social relations, eliminating discriminatory policies, and a continuous commitment to indigenous women's rights in all indigenous institutions and at all levels. The expert group meeting concluded that an important part of this process is changing societal attitudes that condone violence and aggression and perpetuate gender injustice. In other words, if in-community norms of violence go unchallenged, indigenous women and girls internalize and naturalize violence, compounding their susceptibility to substance use. And that's the thing, when you can't trust the institutions, you can't trust the environments, you're going to internalize things and start self-harming and abusing. And I don't know if that was a strategy. I feel like it is. It was. That's why the food is poison and all these drugs are prominent, and they were giving you free drug stations to go use it, and then, battering women and making them, they're going to internalize these things. So I think that was a system that was planned or whatever, but we're better than that now. So we're going to do something really good, and we're going to help each other, because that's what we do. We heal and we build. We create to the best way and the best of our abilities, yeah? Anyway, life is beautiful and I'm very proud of you. Thank you for being me. Thank you for being me. And you know this right here? This is the thought. Let me show you. This represents thought, things above you. This represents sight. Shoot that. So this represents sight, yeah. It's the thoughts, thinking, sight. This is your tongue. Taste. This is feeling. So this is your senses, yeah. This is touching the earth. This is anywhere. This is your tongue. Smell. This is sight. This is your thoughts. It's very beautiful, yeah. You put them together, what do you have? You have a heart. You can say 2 seahorses if you want, but it's a heart. You see that? You bring things together, baby. In a mile high, baby. You see that? You come together. That Voltron was something. Come on. We ain't no robots. We spirit divine. Amen.